Okay, let's bring in Steve Chaggaris and Sean Sullivan in our Washington bureau. Steve is our CBS News political director, and Sean covers Capitol Hill for the Washington Post. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Sean, let me start with you, and I want to ask you about Sally Yates. Where does her expected testimony fit into these questions about Michael Flynn and the White House's response?
Well, I think a couple of ways. One is, are we going to get more information, more light perhaps shed on the extent of the interaction between Flynn and some officials in Russia? And, you know, when you look at the impact on the president and on the White House, you know, we're going back and we're looking at the past, and we're looking at a troubling time in his administration where he had to part ways with somebody who, you know, the entire public, the entire United States saw, and world really saw, you know, was not being honest about his interactions. And so I think if you're the Trump administration and you're the president, you don't want to be looking back. You know, I talk to a lot of Republicans now who say they want to look forward. They want to look at tax reform. They want to look at potentially, you know, a way to solve the debate on health care. And so what this hearing and what this testimony is going to do is it's going to bring us back to an earlier time in the Trump administration that is not associated with good things happening. And so that's something that Trump and his top aides are going to have to weather, even if there's not any new big explosive bombshell or revelation that comes out of her testimony.
Yeah, Steve, what do you think about that? I mean, Sean brings up this point that this is coming at a time when the Trump administration is really trying to take on this very ambitious legislative agenda. What do you think?
Well, we knew this was coming, right? I mean, we knew these investigations were happening, and we knew at some point Congress is going to fire up these public hearings. So what you've seen, I think, over the last couple of weeks, including the effort to try to change the script around 100 days, is the effort for the Trump administration to change the script on just moving forward, like Sean said. And so they're talking about tax reform. They're talking about the budget in the fall that they have to get done. They're talking about Obamacare. Now, not all of these are good stories, but at least it takes the focus off the Russian investigations. Now you're going to bring a bombshell like this Sally Yates testimony up there and bring the focus back on Michael Flynn and why the White House dragged their feet, even though supposedly she told or raised alarm bells about Michael Flynn's conversation with the Russian ambassador. This is now going to bring this whole cloud of the Russia controversy back over the Trump administration at a time when they really just want to focus on policy, because they haven't, again, gotten a lot done in the first 100 days.
And Sean, you cover Capitol Hill. I wonder, what are lawmakers saying about the pace of these Russia investigations? The House and Senate Intelligence Committees, as you know, have been accused of moving too slowly.
Yeah, and you know, when you talk to Republican members on these committees, they say we are committed to getting to the bottom of this. This is not going to be a partisan investigation. We're Republicans, but we're not trying to, you know, cover for anybody. This is going to be a forthright investigation. But when you talk to Democrats, you know, it seems like they continue to have doubts about whether this can be an even-handed investigation when you have Republicans controlling Congress, and so therefore Republicans controlling these committees. And yeah, I think people want, you know, some people want to see more progress on this, more answers on this. But the reality is, until the time comes where you actually get a report that goes public or information that becomes unclassified, there's very little that these lawmakers are willing to say or even can really say about the investigation, which I think does frustrate some people, because, you know, we haven't gotten a lot of new information necessarily, and there are still a whole lot of questions swirling about the extent of the interaction between Trump's team and officials in Russia, and people want to know answers to these questions. So, you know, it's a slow-moving thing, but that's sort of the way these things kind of go in Congress.
Meantime, Steve, President Trump aired some frustrations with Congress Tuesday, suggesting the government should shut down this fall and saying Senate rules should be changed to block legislative filibusters. What audience was the president trying to reach with those comments?
Everyone. I mean, it's a classic Trump lashing out on Twitter. I mean, clearly he's, I think, speaking to conservatives who are upset with Trump, who they accuse him of giving in to Democrats on this agreement. They say he's not being fiscally responsible with this, and that it's not conservative enough. There's some complaints that there wasn't an effort to defund Planned Parenthood in there. probably also talking to Democrats as well. You heard Mick Mulvaney, his budget director, get out there today and say that he's frustrated with Democrats because he says that Trump negotiated with Democrats in good faith, and they went out there and tried to spike the football and throw it back in Trump's face. So I don't know. It seems like he's talking to everybody here.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you, Sean. We saw the reaction. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was quick to say that the Senate would not move to eliminate the filibuster. What kind of position is he put in when the president makes a threat, some might say, like that one?
Yeah, not a position he wants to be in at all. He made very clear today, as he has before, that there's no appetite to change the legislative filibuster. Even Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, said essentially the same thing. There's no appetite to do that. Republicans, of course, did change the rule on filibusters to get President Trump's Supreme Court nominee in. But when McConnell did that, he did make clear, look, we're not going to change the legislative filibuster. And his reasoning is essentially that if you did, you would basically upend the way the Senate works, and there really wouldn't be any difference anymore between the way the Senate works and the House works. And, that's not the way the Founding Fathers envisioned it. But every time Trump says something or suggests something that is at odds with what Republican leaders on Capitol Hill say, reporters are going to ask those leaders whether they agree with him or not. It's going to be a distraction. So, I don't think this is something that Mitch McConnell was necessarily happy to hear today.
Yeah, I wonder, Sean, how that affects the relationship, right? The working relationship between the White House and lawmakers if they're having to basically come out and once these sort of trial balloons, if you will, are floated, come out, make a statement on it, have to answer these questions at a time when, as we've been saying all along, you've got things like health care and tax reform, very difficult legislative challenges ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When, I sat down with Mitch McConnell a couple of months ago, asked him about kind of how he sizes up, or how he sized up, Trump's the first part of Trump's presidency at that point. And he said, I like what he's doing a lot more than what he's saying and what he's tweeting and the fights that he's picking. I don't necessarily like that. But the reality is when he says these things, when he does these things on Twitter, that's time and energy Republicans have to spend responding to that or reacting to that and not focusing on their agenda. So, Republicans might look at what Trump says, what he tweets, what he writes on social media as, kind of a distraction. But really, in the long term, this could really take its toll on the relationship, as you said, because every time they have to deal with this, it's a time when they're not on the same page talking about why they want to pass their health care plan or how they're going to pass their tax reform plan. And so you wonder, as the months go by, if this is going to take its toll on the relationship between Trump and McConnell and Trump and Paul Ryan and Trump and others on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask both of you this, starting with you, Steve. Let's talk about health care. Is this latest attempt at a health care overhaul dead?
Let's go through the list of potential health metaphors, dying metaphors that we could use to describe it. Life support, barely a pulse. I don't know. I mean, you can pick one. I mean, it's not dead, but it's pretty close. Our whip count on the House of House Republicans has 21 Republicans against this. If they get to 23, it's dead, right? So, and there are plenty of undecideds right now still. So we're in the exact opposite place where we were the first time around with this bill. The first time around, it was conservatives who weren't on board, and they couldn't get this bill to the floor for a vote. Now it's moderate Republicans who aren't on board or are peeling off, it seems, every day. And so, it's a situation where it's just a piece of legislation that Republicans can't agree on in a majority of Republicans. And so it's a problem for the House Republicans. It's a problem for the Trump administration. They want to get this thing through, but they can't get enough Republicans to agree on this. And so I think this is going to be falling pretty quickly, pretty soon, I think, at this point.
Sean, what about you? How is health care looking?
Yeah, I agree. It's looking, like it's going to be very tough right now for the Republicans. Steve makes a great point. They're right up against their margin of error. There's only so many votes they can lose, assuming Democrats don't support this, and there's no sign that even a single Democrat would support this. And they're right up against that. I was talking to Congressman Chris Collins today, who was a supporter of this bill that, is that Republicans are trying to get to a vote right now. He says he is still a supporter, but now the way things look, the fact that, these no votes are really locked in, he thinks that Republican leadership should go back to the bill that they pulled a few weeks ago because that didn't have enough support. So now you're talking about kind of going back and forth between two different things. We saw, Fred Upton, who is a very influential Republican, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, former chairman of the committee, saying he can't support this today. He's worried about what this bill would do to people who obtain coverage and who have pre-existing conditions. He's worried that they're not going to have the same level of coverage that they would under the Affordable Care Act. So there are a lot of major and influential Republican critics and opponents of this bill. And right now, the trend line is going the wrong way if you're a supporter of this bill. It's not building momentum this week, it's losing momentum. And remember, the House is scheduled on Thursday to go on recess for all of next week. So if they don't get a vote this week, we're looking at the middle of this month before they can even revisit this.
All right, we'll continue to watch it. Meantime, what did each of you hear in Hillary Clinton's remark today, Steve, that she's now part of the resistance?
On that specifically, I heard that she just wants to be part of the political conversation. I think she's moving forward, with her life post-election. But at the same time, she spent a lot of time relitigating what happened last November and spent a lot of time placing blame a little bit on herself, but a lot elsewhere, focused specifically on the James Comey letter about 10 days before the election and on the WikiLeaks emails. And, the evidence doesn't necessarily back her up. There's more and more Democrats are looking into the data on this, and it's suggesting that it really was white working class voters in the economy that affected the vote last year. And so it doesn't really sort of back up her excuses for what happened. I think you're going to hear some Democrats say she needs to look a little bit more inward on this.
Does that motivate Democrats at all? Sean, you think?
Well, it's interesting. We talked earlier about Trump having to deal with stuff from the past as opposed to looking to the future. And this interview comes at a time when I think a lot of Democrats want to say, okay, we didn't win in this election. We haven't done well in, a lot of the most recent elections. We need to stay focused on how we reshape our party, how we reshape our message, and how we look at the next election in a different way. And, when you hear Hillary Clinton, essentially relitigate a lot of what happened in the last election, I think it might frustrate some Democrats who want to look forward. But by the same token, it might also motivate some Democrats who might watch that interview and say, you know what, I agree with her, and I'm angry about how that election turned out, and this motivates me to get out and, like she said, be part of the resistance. So it could work both ways, motivating people, but also frustrating some Democrats who want to just turn the page on the 2016 election, look ahead and move forward.
Yeah. All right. Steve Chaggaris and Sean Sullivan in Washington, thank you both.
Thanks.
As Georgia's 6th district gears up for a runoff election next month, new polling numbers could cause some worry for Republicans. The seat was left vacant by Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. And new internal polling reportedly shows Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff in a dead heat with Republican opponent Karen Handel. The pair are set to square off after both failed to win a majority during the district's primary last month. Despite Ossoff's initial margin of victory, critics expect his support to wane once constituents in the traditionally red district are able to rally behind one Republican candidate. The final vote will take place on June 20th.